Today we're going to be looking at learning targets 10 through 12. Arthropods. Should have completed this over the weekend. Arthropods literally means jointed feet, so they get their name from the Latin that means jointed feet. Animals, arthropods are animals with segment bodies, exoskeletons, and jointed appendages. You can see this it's like a millipede here. This millipede has the exoskeleton, has the jointed appendages. Here's a better picture of an exoskeleton that has been, the actual insect has crawled out of it after it molts. And you can see how this is a hard shell. It can be used as protection. It also supports the body much like our own skeleton does. It just does it from the outside. And here are some pictures of some different appendages that some different arthropods have. Appendages can be anything that they use to eat, or their legs, or antenna for that matter. There's just any sort of appendage, and you can see how they're jointed, all the different joints. So as far as their 7 essential functions, arthropods, as far as feeding is concerned, they're able to exploit almost any niche available. You can see here this particular arthropod is a predator, and it's feasting on a lizard. And there are spiders that eat birds, but there are some that, not spiders, but some arthropods that eat grass. And so you have pretty much every sort of feeding available, and they're able to do this with their jointed appendages here. As you can see, this one's grabbing hold of the lizard just fine and eating it. Arthropods are the most complicated organisms that we've looked at so far as specialized structures. For respiration, some arthropods have what are called tracheal tubes, and you can see that here, and they run along the side of their body, and they might be these little holes along the side of their body, and they're connected to a tube, and those tracheal tubes allow for the intake of air, which allows for oxygen to be diffused. Some organisms have what are called book lungs, and spiders are good examples of this, and the lungs will kind of have a shape like this, where there are lots of pages stacked on each other. It allows for lots of surface area, gathering of lots of oxygen. Also in this picture, you can see that they have an open circulatory system. You see the heart appear in the different hearts all throughout here, and it basically pumps the blood into these large sinus cavities, and the blood eventually pulls back near the heart and is pumped back out. And so all arthropods have an open circulatory system. As far as excretion is concerned, there are special structures called Malpighian tubules, and these Malpighian tubes excrete waste into the blood, much like our own kidneys do, and then the organisms are able to get rid of it that way. And so very similar to a kidney. Response, we see a much more organized brain with arthropods, and a much more well-developed nervous system than some of the species that we've looked at before. Some arthropods even have compound eyes, and some of the most complex eyes in the animal kingdom. Some of the compound eyes of different insects have up to 1,000 different lenses with which they can see things with, so they can detect movement and detect light from long distances away. As for movement, arthropods have a series of complementary muscles, and if you want to think about that, the best way to think about that is one muscle is used to extend the arm or leg here this way, while the other one is used to pull it back this way. And you can see that there, these two muscles, the blue one and the red one that are labeled there, they're able to complement one another, much like our own muscle system. There's a similar sort of structure that's used with the wings as well. This is a new development that arthropods are able to fly, and so that same kind of complementary system is used to fly these insects long distances. Reproduction for arthropods is sexual reproduction. Some have internal fertilization. Most terrestrial arthropods have internal fertilization, where most aquatic arthropods have external fertilization. A lot of this is just dependent upon the species. Now, the arthropod evolution, arthropods have evolved over a long period of time, as you can see here, and remember these uh, cladograms here. This is called a cladogram. We'll be getting some practice with these again soon. And the cladogram, if you'll notice, shows the most primitive organism down here at the bottom. And as you go up the ladder, things begin to get more sophisticated. And the way that arthropods have gained sophistication is by losing segments and gaining more specialized limbs. So you can see this organism here, lots of segments, no, very little specialization. And then as you go up the evolutionary ladder, you have lots and lots of specialized limbs, and you have more limbs evolving here, you have wings here, and you have almost entirely aquatic, and then you have some that have kept the ancestral trait but are much more refined in keeping that. And so lots of specialized appendages lead to a greater amount of fitness in their particular environment, because each individual arthropod is specifically evolved and adapted for its own environment. Now, one adaptation that arthropods have evolved is this concept of molting, which I mentioned earlier. Molting is just simply the shedding of a former exoskeleton as they outgrow it, and a new skeleton will grow in its place. So here you see this here scorpion has just molted, and this is its former skeleton, leaving that behind so that it can grow to a new size, because the skeleton can be confining. And so when it's in this state, the new skeleton is still soft and is a vulnerable animal, but over time that skeleton will harden and will be able to protect it better. There are several different groups of arthropods that we need to be aware of. The first one is the one many think about, is crustaceans. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that arthropods are classified according to how many segments they have, also the number of appendages they have, specifically, usually, their mouthpart appendages here. They have different mouthpart appendages depending on what type of arthropod they are. Crustaceans have two pairs of antennae, which you can't see on this crab. 2 or 3 segments, and their mouth parts are called mandibles. And so this is where we see the mandibles, and the mandibles are used for crushing food and eating different things. So crustaceans, typically aquatic. The spider type things, Chelicerates is their more formal name. You don't need to know Chelicerates, but you do need to know that in this group are things like spiders and scorpions, which you see here, but also things like ticks and mites are also in this group. And what they're separated is they have a mouth part that are like fangs, and the fangs are used to inject venom to paralyze their prey, or for something like a tick, for instance, that mouth part is used to obtain blood from their host. These type of organisms usually have 2 sections and usually have 4 pairs of legs. And then lastly is the group that insects is in. This is the Uniramians, and insects are in this group, which we'll talk about uh, separately. But you also have centipedes and millipedes, centipedes and um, millipedes, and obviously the big difference here is centipedes have one leg per segment, and millipedes have two legs per segment. They usually don't have as many legs as their names might indicate. They have one pair of antennae, and they have unbranched appendages. So moving on to insects in general, insects have a specific body plan. They have three segments. They have a head, a thorax, which is this middle section here, and then abdomen, which is this end section here. They have three pairs of legs, all attached to the thorax, and you can see that here plainly. Um, for response, some things that set them apart from other arthropods. One of them is response to stimuli. They have very complex sensory organs. You can see the eye here is a compound eye, and this eye can see movement from long ways away and can see the slightest movements. So they're able to catch prey, and they're able to stay out of danger that way. Many insects have very complex and intricate chemical sensors as well. There are flies that can sense whether or not the water that they are standing in has sugar in it just by the chemical sensors in their legs. Some grasshoppers have ears on the back of their legs, and so very complex, intricate system of sensory receptors. For feeding, they have three pairs of appendages for mouth parts, uh, including mandibles, and so they're able to eat pretty much whatever they want. Different animal or different insects eat different things, but they're able to exploit many different niches in this way. Some of them even produce saliva, and that saliva is able to help digest the food that they eat and make it into more edible forms, which is exactly what bees do. Bees uh, basically spit onto the nectar, and that causes nectar to turn into honey over time, which is a much more edible and tasty form. Movement is a lot different than a lot of arthropods as well. Their legs can be used for jumping, for grabbing things. It's not uncommon to see a fly upside down on the ceiling or a bug on the side of the wall because they are very good at moving, very good at grabbing things. And many insects, of course, fly, which this has allowed them to proliferate the whole globe at a very rapid rate. And this is why insects make up about 75% of all animals on the face of the earth. Another thing that sets them apart is this concept of metamorphosis. And this is just literally means to change shape or to change form. And insects do this over the course of their life. There are two different kinds of metamorphosis. Here shows what's called a complete metamorphosis, where the larva of a insect is a completely different form. A larval butterfly is basically a caterpillar, and it kind of just looks like a bug or like a worm that just eats stuff, and there's nothing special about it. Whereas the butterfly is able to fly around and eat a completely different food source than the caterpillar does. Well, what happens is this caterpillar will eventually crawl into the case that it makes itself, and it's called a pupa, and it pupates, meaning it kind of sits there and changes, and then eventually will come out of the shell and have a new form completely. And this is called complete metamorphosis, when the larva has a completely different form than the adults. Whereas incomplete metamorphosis is where you have something called a nymph stage. And this nymph stage is simply a different form of the adult stage. You can see here that the nymph and the adult do look different, but there is not a huge difference like between the caterpillar and the butterfly. So incomplete metamorphosis is where you have smaller changes that lead to adulthood. Insects have many benefits for humans, though mostly insects are seen as destructive. And things like, think of locusts and termites and different sorts of insects, and of course we think of spiders and ticks and these pests that we have. But many insects are obviously very important for our livelihood. Butterflies are an example of this. Ladybugs are necessary for agriculture because they keep the harmful insects away. Um, Bees, moths, many different pollinators uh, are basically required for agriculture to be successful. And one last thing on insects is this concept of insect societies. Some insects form societies. This is mainly ants, bees, and termites. And they're able to form these very complex communities with caste systems. And a caste system is where individuals have a particular role uh, in the community. You see this in bees, where you have worker bees and drones and the queen, and each one of them has a specific role. Here is a picture of what are called driver ants. And driver ants are particularly famous or infamous. When they decide to move, they basically cut through a forest and they kill everything that is living, and they form these structures to protect the horde as they're moving through the forest. And these particular ants that are forming this big wall of death here are these ants are designed to protect the horde as they're moving through with all the food and as they decide to move from one end of the jungle to the next. And you can see how each individual is working for the better of the whole. And they're able to do this through chemical signals, through visual signals. In the case of bees, bees will do dances when they return to the hive in order to explain to the other bees where the nearest source of nectar might be. Ants, of course, leave chemical trails, and that's how the ant that's in the back is able to follow the ants that are in the front. And so insects are able to form very complex societies where they even farm, and they have a place where they bury their dead. They have a place where they store food. And so it's a very unlikely thing from something so small, but they are able to form these very complex groups.